There's a lot of different presentations, a lot of ways you can catch walleyes come middle of summer, but I tell you what, if there's one presentation that just shines for just simply catching a lot of fish, July, August, all the way into the fall, it would definitely have to be using lead core. And I think the mystique of lead core is I can put a small crankbait down into that deep water. And so you can free line a big deep diving crankbait like a free diver or a reef runner, maybe some of the bigger bombers or some of the bigger tail dancers, and get them down 20, 30 feet of water. But it's a big bait with a big bill with a lot of water displacement. Beauty of lead core is that you can follow these deep contours and you can put these small baits down in that deep water. And you start putting these small baits down in deep water, the beauty of it is that you catch everything. And so when I did a lot of guiding, I ran a lot of lead core because I just wanted to catch a lot of fish, come July and August. If you have kids out in the boat or if you just want to catch a lot of fish, lead core will catch you a lot of fish come midsummer. And so you look at some of your, your traditional lead core lures that, a lot of people have in their arsenal. It might be, say like the number 4, number 5 jointed shad rap. So it might be a number 5 shad rap. It might be a Walleye diver, salmon hornet, a flicker shad, just small baits. One lure that I've really fallen in love with here recently is a little lure called a rumble bug, which you can see here. It's just a round little bait with a long bill on it. And I think the beauty of this, the reason why it works so well is that in a lot of these fisheries, these fish are keying in on young of the year fish. In a lot of cases, it might be young of the year white bass, it might be young of the year drum, young of the year crappies, or even bluegills that these fish are keying in on. And you look at middle of summer, after all these fish hatches, the number of baits, the number of lures that these fish can eat is just staggering. And so that's the other advantage of lead core, is that a lot of times in July and August, you have warmer water temps, you have high metabolism, these fish are just eating nonstop, and a lot of times these fish are full. So whether you're dealing with bug hatches or just an abundance of young of the year fish, sometimes you just have to put a little snack in front of these fish. And so lead core will do that. And so a lot of times if you look at where you're catching fish, say in May and June, where say it's a shallow point coming off of a shoreline, maybe a flat or a reef, that's less than 20 feet of water, a lot of times to find fish in July and August, you just have to slide out and down the break line. And a lot of times these spots are big, they're long contours. Some of these break lines, it might be a quarter mile, 300 yards. I mean, a lot of times they're big areas, and there might be key sweet spots along that contour. Maybe there's some rock or something that makes that certain stretch a little bit more special. But you can pull deep along these contours and put a small bait in front of a lot of fish. And so lead core rocks come midsummer. I mean, you get these hot dog days of summer, lead core is going to catch you a lot of fish. So lead core is very speed sensitive. When you speed up, it'll raise. When you slow down, it'll sink. And so, we're trolling an average of 2 miles an hour. But when you're letting out line, probably the easiest thing to do is just, let out line until you can feel it hitting the bottom. Assuming that you don't have a lot of weeds and snags on the bottom, if that lead core is slapping the bottom where you can actually feel it hitting the bottom, you've got way too much lead core out. Reel it up until you can feel that lure vibrating. And, typically you want to be just off the bottom in a lot of cases, especially here on Devil's Lake. And you want to just barely tickle the bottom and fish right above the bottom. And so if you feel that lead core hitting the bottom, reel up until you can feel that vibration. And a lot of times when you're trolling, you just see that lead core just be vibrating. That means that it's running clean. If that stops vibrating, usually you've got something on the line. Might be some weeds, might be some scum on the hooks, or you could be letting out so much line that you're hitting bottom. But that's probably the biggest thing, is you can definitely let out too much line. And then you just use your line counter as a reference. A lot of times people want to know, some magic number. If I'm in 20 feet, how much line do I let out? Every boat, every system's going to be a little different, so you're going to have to kind of make up your own recipe. And so let out the line, reel it up until you can feel the vibration, and see where you're at on the line counter. So there's a few different setups you can use with lead core. A lot of times I'm using just a traditional 17-pound lead core. One thing that I started to do is I've been using this Stren lead core that's got a little bit thinner diameter, so it dives a little bit deeper, so I can keep these lures a little closer to the boat. I feel like that gives me a little bit of advantage. Quicker setup time, not as many feet to reel in, get a fish on, less can go wrong. Traditionally, with lead core, if you troll 2 miles an hour, you're going to get about 7-8 feet of depth for every 30 feet of lead core. Now, every 30 feet of lead core is a different color. And so when people talk about colors of lead, that's what they're referring to. And so that's just the basic formula. But the thing about this to remember, and I think the reason that lead core is so effective, is that as you're following that contour and that boat is snaking along that contour, trying to stay in a specific depth, that lead core snakes behind the boat and kind of mimics what the boat does. And so if you do an S to follow a piece of structure, that lead core is going to S behind the boat. And so it really does a good job of following the boat so you can stick on these specific contours. Now, running multiple lines, especially like in North and South Dakota, running 2 lines per person, or, Wisconsin, you're running 3 lines per person, even Minnesota where you're running 1 line, but you have multiple people in the boat. When you start running several rods, you do have to stagger them to keep them from getting tangled up. And so this is just a 5-foot Shields Extreme trolling rod, shorty rod. I'll run the 5-footers out the back. I'll run 8.5-foot long rods or even longer rods out the sides just to keep them staggered out. And a lot of times on the back rods, I'll let out a little bit more line. On the side rods or the rods in front, I'll let out a little less line just to keep them staggered that way too. But run short rods out the back, spread your long rods out on the sides of the boat, and then stagger your leads a little bit. And that's how you keep from getting tangled up. The other thing to remember is that lead core is a little bit larger diameter, and so when you're choosing a line counter reel, make sure you choose a larger diameter reel. So this is just a 300 series, Shields Outfitter reel, cold water series. I've had a lot of luck with these. Use a larger reel so that way you can fit more colors of lead. A lot of times I'm putting a 10-pound monofilament backing, and I'm trying to spool up with at least 5 colors of lead. And so on these particular reels here, I've got 7 colors of lead on there. That'll get me down plenty depth of water. I mean, I personally don't like to fish deeper than 30, 40 feet because a lot of times you start seeing barrel trauma on fish. And so a lot of times I like to fish, 20 to 30 feet if I can get away with it. But use that larger capacity reel so that way you can fit more lead core. Now, as far as the leader, there's no right or wrong. I can tell you a lot of inland water like Devil's Lake, Lake of the Woods, where you have stained water and we're using a lot of lead core, you can use a braided leader like a 10-pound fire line. And the braided leader is a little bit of an advantage, I believe, because you can feel this lure working. You can tell if it's fouled up. You can tell if it's got weeds on the hook. You can just tell when that lure is working correctly. The big thing with the leaders is that you have to make sure that they're all the same so that way everything matches up with your trolling system. And so if you're fishing inland water, a lot of times I'm just doing 2 arm lengths. That way, it's an easy way to measure out in the boat, whether it's you have a 5-foot wingspan, a 6-foot wingspan, just keep everything the same. That's just an easy system as far as measuring your leader length out in the boat. So inland water, stained water, I'm using 2 arm lengths of braided line. On clear water, you get out in the Great Lakes, you get even Mille Lacs, some of these northern Minnesota lakes that are really clear. You've got excellent water visibility, maybe zebra mussels. A lot of times I'm using 3 to 4 arm lengths of leader. I'm finding that I have to use a longer leader. And a lot of times instead of using braided line, I'll use fluorocarbon. Okay, and so a lot of times I might use a 10-pound fluorocarbon if you're dealing with really, really good water visibility. Okay, but that's the system. Use your arm lengths to measure. And then a lot of times I'm just tying the lead core to the leader with just a nail knot. There's a Wilson knot and a nail knot. You can look these up as far as showing you how to tie these knots. There's a lot of YouTube videos will show you how to tie the knots. I find the nail knot's probably the easiest knot to tie when I'm out in the boat. Some people also use a tiny little swivel, but I don't like to reel those swivels up through my guides if I don't have to. But the big thing is make sure that they're all the same. Doesn't matter if they're 10 feet or 20 feet. That's not so important as making sure that they're all the same, because what you'll find is, say if you have a leader that's 5 feet and a leader that's 15 feet, the shorter leader will a lot of times dive deeper. And so say if you're catching fish on 105 feet of lead core, say you catch 2 fish in a row, you want to make sure that the other rods are running the exact same depth when you put them out at 105 feet. You don't want to, you don't want your trolling system where every reel's doing a different thing. And so make sure that everything is the same. Same line capacity, same amount of lead. Make sure that your spools are full so that way your line counter is more accurate. Make sure that your leaders are all the same. I even go so far as making sure that my angles and my rod holders are all the same as far as where the water, from the rod tip to the water, how much lead core is out of the water. If it's 2 feet, 4 feet, whatever, make sure that it's all the same with all your rods, and that'll really make your dive curves a lot more precise as far as trying to match up. But just a deadly, deadly system that catches a lot of fish come midsummer. I mean, if somebody, if I wanted to just catch as many fish as possible on a lot of different lengths, I tell you what, it's really tough to beat lead core. Putting these small baits in front of a lot of fish. And the cool thing about this is you're going to catch numbers of fish. You're going to catch small walleyes, you're going to catch walleyes to eat, you're going to catch big walleyes. You're going to have all kinds of incidental catches. You're going to catch panfish, sometimes you catch big perch, big crappies. I mean, everything eats a little bait this time of year.